The target was 2,600 meters away, and the elite sniper unit had been trying for 6 hours. Mission failure seemed inevitable until Supply Sergeant Martinez stepped forward and said, "Permission to take the shot, sir." What happened next left the entire unit speechless. She held 47 national precision shooting records they never knew existed. From which city in the world are you watching this video today? If this story resonates with you, consider subscribing for more tales of unrecognized heroes. The morning sun cast long shadows across Forward Operating Base Sentinel as Supply Sergeant Elena Martinez completed her daily inventory check. At 0630 hours, she moved through the supply depot with practiced efficiency, her clipboard documenting everything from MREs to medical supplies with the same meticulous attention to detail she had demonstrated every day for the past 6 years. Elena wore her ACUs with quiet professionalism, her sergeant stripes earned through consistent performance rather than dramatic achievements. Her dark hair was pulled back in regulation style, and her brown eyes held the steady focus of someone who understood that logistics operations were the invisible foundation that kept combat units operational. At 32, she had found satisfaction in work that others might consider mundane, taking pride in ensuring that every soldier had what they needed when they needed it. The supply depot occupied a strategic position within the base perimeter, close enough to the operational areas to provide rapid support but positioned to avoid interfering with combat training. From her vantage point, Elena could observe various units conducting their specialized training exercises, though she rarely had reason to interact with them directly beyond fulfilling equipment requests. This morning was different. The elevated tension was obvious even from a distance as she watched members of the 75th Ranger Regiment's elite sniper unit prepare for what appeared to be an unusually complex exercise. Master Sergeant David Chen, the unit's senior instructor, moved between shooting positions with the focused intensity that indicated high-stakes training rather than routine practice. Elena continued her inventory work, checking serial numbers on rifles and confirming ammunition counts, but her attention was increasingly drawn to the activity at the sniper range. Through her peripheral vision, she could see the characteristic setup for extreme long-distance shooting, specialized equipment, weather monitoring stations, and the methodical preparation that preceded attempts at the outer limits of precision marksmanship. Staff Sergeant Michael Torres, one of the unit's most experienced snipers, was positioned behind a Barrett M82 50 caliber rifle, his spotter providing wind and distance calculations for what appeared to be an extraordinarily challenging shot. Elena had processed equipment requests for this unit hundreds of times, becoming familiar with their gear and capabilities through the administrative side of their operations, though they rarely acknowledged her beyond the necessary interactions required for supply transactions. Wind holding steady at 12 knots, northwest, she heard the spotter announce as she moved closer to the supply tent that bordered the training area. Target confirmed at 2,600 meters. Elena paused in her inventory check, recognizing the significance of the distance. At 2,600 meters, they were operating near the theoretical limits of precision rifle marksmanship, where factors like earth rotation and atmospheric density variations became critical variables that most shooters never encountered in standard training. The crack of the rifle echoed across the range, followed by a long silence as spotters confirmed impact location. "Miss. Left and low by approximately 3 meters," came the report through the radio communication. Master Sergeant Chen's voice carried across the range with the controlled frustration of someone dealing with repeated failures. "Reset for another attempt. Check your calculations again." Elena returned to her clipboard, but found herself unconsciously tracking the sniper team's progress as she continued her administrative duty. Over the next 4 hours, she witnessed multiple attempts by different members of the elite unit, each resulting in misses that appeared to confound their most experienced shooters and instructors. By 10:30 hours, the situation had escalated beyond training exercise parameters. Colonel Patricia Wade, the battalion commander, arrived at the range with the purposeful stride of someone responding to a developing problem, rather than observing routine training. "Status report," Colonel Wade demanded as she approached Master Sergeant Chen's position. "Ma'am, we've attempted 23 shots at the 2,600-meter target, using our 3 most qualified marksmen," Chen replied, his professional composure unable to completely mask his frustration. Conditions are within acceptable parameters, equipment is functioning normally, but we're consistently missing by margins that don't align with our calculated solution. Elena moved closer to the supply tent's edge, ostensibly organizing equipment, but actually listening to a conversation that was becoming increasingly urgent. Through the tent's open flap, she could see the target through high-powered optics. A standard military silhouette, positioned at a distance that challenged the limits of human and equipment capability. This was supposed to be a demonstration for the visiting Joint Chiefs delegation. Colonel Wade said, her tone indicating the political implications of continued failure. We have representatives from 4 allied nations arriving at 1,500 hours to observe our advanced marksmanship capability. Staff Sergeant Torres, who had made the most recent attempt, approached the command group with obvious reluctance. Ma'am, respectively, this shot may be beyond our current capability given the specific condition. The target placement, wind patterns, and range combination create variables we haven't encountered in our training scenarios. Colonel Wade studied the range setup through binoculars, calculating options that appeared increasingly limited. What do you need to make this shot work? Honestly, ma'am, Chen replied, we might need someone with experience in competitive long-range shooting. Military training focuses on practical engagement distances. This shot requires techniques more common in civilian precision shooting competition. Elena felt something shift in her chest as she heard those words. For 6 years, she had listened to discussions about marksmanship challenges, equipment limitations, and technical problems, while maintaining the careful invisibility that had become second nature since her transfer to supply operation. But hearing the elite unit struggle with a challenge that fell directly within her previous area of expertise created an internal conflict she hadn't anticipated. The morning she had accepted the transfer to supply duty, Elena had made a conscious decision to leave her previous specialization behind. The transition had been voluntary, motivated by personal reasons that she rarely discussed, but it had required her to suppress knowledge and skills that had once defined her professional identity. As she listened to the continued discussion about the shot's impossibility, Elena found herself mentally calculating the variables the snipers were struggling with. The 2,600-meter distance, combined with the specific wind patterns and elevation changes she could observe from her position, created a ballistics problem that was complex but not unsolvable for someone with the right background and experience. Ma'am, Torres was saying to Colonel Wade, we could attempt to relocate the target to a more manageable distance, or modify the demonstration parameters to showcase skills within our proven capabilities. The entire point of this demonstration is to showcase our ability to engage targets at extreme distances. Allied forces need to see that we can provide precision support beyond conventional parameters. Elena watched as Chen studied weather data and ballistics calculations, searching for solutions that continued to elude his team's considerable expertise. The frustration was obvious in their body language, as experienced professionals encountered a problem that appeared to exceed their training and capabilities. That's when Elena Martinez made a decision that would fundamentally alter her carefully maintained anonymity. She set down her clipboard and walked across the range toward the command group, her movement deliberate but unhurried. As she approached, conversations ceased, and all eyes turned toward the supply sergeant, who rarely ventured into operational areas beyond her administrative responsibility. Ma'am, Elena said, addressing Colonel Wade with the professional respect that had characterized all her interactions with command personnel. Permission to speak? Wade looked surprised by the interruption, but nodded. Go ahead, Sergeant. Elena took a deep breath, knowing that her next words would expose aspects of her background that she had deliberately concealed for 6 years. Ma'am, I believe I can make this shot. The silence that followed was complete except for the distant sounds of base operations and the constant whisper of wind across the range. Master Sergeant Chen, Staff Sergeant Torres, and the other members of the elite sniper unit stared at Elena with expressions ranging from confusion to disbelief. Sergeant Martinez, Chen said carefully, this is an extremely technical shot requiring specialized training and experience. Supply operations don't typically involve marksmanship at this level. No, they don't, Elena agreed. But before I transferred to supply duty, I had experience with precision shooting that might be relevant to your current challenge. Colonel Wade studied Elena with growing interest. What kind of experience? Elena hesitated, knowing that her answer would require her to discuss a period of her life she had deliberately put behind her. Ma'am, I held 47 national records in competitive precision shooting before joining the military. I specialized in extreme long-range engagements under variable conditions. The impact of this revelation was immediate and dramatic. Torres looked at Elena as if seeing her for the first time. Chen's expression shifted from skepticism to intense curiosity, and Colonel Wade leaned forward with the focused attention of someone recognizing potentially critical information. 47 national records. Wade repeated, her tone indicating the need for clarification. Yes, ma'am. Various categories, including longest precision shot, accuracy under adverse conditions, and rapid engagement of multiple long-range targets. I competed internationally for 8 years before enlisting. Chen stepped closer, his professional interest overcoming his initial surprise. Sergeant, if you have that level of expertise, why are you working supply operations? The question touched on personal history that Elena had hoped to keep private, but the circumstances left her little choice beyond honesty or continued concealment. Personal reasons, Master Sergeant. I needed a change from competitive shooting, and supply operations offered the stability I was looking for. Colonel Wade made a command decision with the rapidity that had defined her successful military career. Sergeant Martinez, I'm authorizing you to attempt this. Master Sergeant Chen, provide Sergeant Martinez with whatever equipment and support she requires. Elena felt the weight of returning to a world she had deliberately left behind, but the operational necessity overrode her personal preferences. Ma'am, I'll need access to the Barrett system that Staff Sergeant Torres has been using, current weather data, and approximately 15 minutes to assess the specific conditions. Chen nodded, though his expression showed continued amazement at the unexpected turn of events. Torres, brief Sergeant Martinez on the equipment configuration and range setup. As Elena approached the shooting position she hadn't occupied in over 6 years, muscle memory began reasserting itself despite the extended hiatus from competitive shooting. Her hands moved over the Barrett M82 with familiar efficiency, checking scope alignment, trigger pull and mechanical function with the unconscious competence that comes from thousands of hours of practice. The scope is zeroed for 100 meters, Torres explained, providing technical details about the rifle's configuration. We've been calculating adjustments for the 2600-meter engagement based on standard ballistics tables. Elena nodded, studying the scope settings while simultaneously processing environmental information through senses that had been trained to detect subtleties most shooters never notice. What's your current windage and elevation adjustment? 12 minutes right windage, 37 minutes up elevation, Torres replied, referring to the scope adjustments calculated for the extreme distance shot. Elena made several minor adjustments to the scope settings, her movements precise and confident. The calculations are close, but they're not accounting for the thermal gradient between the firing position and target area. The temperature differential is creating a slight updraft that's affecting bullet trajectory in the final two. Chen observed Elena's preparation with growing respect. How can you determine thermal gradients without specialized equipment? Experience. Elena replied simply. When you shoot competitively at these distances, you learn to read environmental conditions through observation rather than relying entirely on instrument. Elena settled into the shooting position with practiced efficiency, her body automatically assuming the stance and breathing pattern that had carried her through hundreds of competitive events. The familiar weight of the rifle, the scope picture showing the distant target, and the mental calculation of ballistics variables combined to create a sense of returning home after a long absence. Spotting conditions are optimal, she announced to Chen, who had taken the position of primary observer. Target is clearly defined, wind is holding steady, and atmospheric conditions are stable. Elena controlled her breathing with the precision that had made her legendary in competitive circles, each inhalation and exhalation timed to minimize the natural movement that could affect shot placement at extreme distances. Her trigger finger applied pressure with the gradual increase that transforms potential energy into kinetic energy without disturbing the rifle's alignment. The Barrett M82 fired with its characteristic authority, 50 caliber round departing the muzzle at 2,800 feet per second on a trajectory calculated through experience, rather than formal computation. Elena maintained her sight picture through the recoil, watching the bullets trace through the scope as it crossed the 2,600 meters separating firing position from target. The silence that followed seemed to extend indefinitely as spotters confirmed impact location through high-powered optics. Elena remained in position, knowing that the shot had felt correct, but waiting for external confirmation of results that would determine whether her 6-year hiatus from precision shooting had degraded skills that had once defined her identity. Direct hit, center mass, Chen announced, his voice carrying amazement that bordered on disbelief. Perfect shot placement. Elena set the rifle aside and stood, feeling the satisfaction of successful precision shooting, combined with the complex emotions that came from returning to a discipline she had deliberately abandoned. Around her, the elite sniper unit that had struggled for 6 hours with the challenging shot stood in stunned silence. Colonel Wade approached Elena with an expression that combined professional respect with obvious curiosity about the supply sergeant, who had just demonstrated capabilities none of them had suspected. Outstanding shooting, Sergeant Martinez. That was exactly what we needed for today's demonstration. Thank you, ma'am, Elena replied, though her tone carried the same measured professionalism that had characterized her supply operations, rather than the elation typically associated with exceptional marksmanship achievement. Torres studied Elena with new understanding. Sergeant, that was one of the most impressive shots I've ever witnessed. Your technique was flawless. Elena nodded acknowledgement, but began walking back toward the supply depot, clearly intending to resume her administrative duties, as if the extraordinary demonstration had been a brief interruption rather than a career-defining moment. Sergeant Martinez, Chen called after her, would you be interested in providing training support to our unit? Your expertise could significantly enhance our long-range capabilities. Elena paused, considering an offer that would require her to engage more actively with the precision shooting community she had left behind. The prospect was both appealing and concerning, representing a potential return to the world that had once consumed her life. I appreciate the offer, Master Sergeant, she replied carefully, but I'm committed to my supply operations responsibility. Today was an exception due to operational necessity. Colonel Wade intervened before Elena could leave the area. Sergeant, I'd like to discuss your background in more detail. Your skills represent a significant asset that we may not be utilizing effectively. Elena recognized the tone of a commanding officer who was reevaluating personnel assignments based on newly discovered capabilities. The conversation that would follow would likely result in changes to her duty assignment that she wasn't sure she wanted. Ma'am, I transferred to supply operations by choice, Elena said respectfully but firmly. I found satisfaction in logistics work and prefer to maintain that focus. Wade studied Elena with the analytical approach she applied to all personnel decisions. Sergeant, talent like yours is rare. I'm not suggesting we remove you from supply duties, but we should explore ways to utilize your marksmanship expertise when operational requirements dictate. The compromise represented a middle ground that would allow Elena to maintain her primary assignment, while acknowledging the value of her specialized skills. It was a solution that addressed operational needs without forcing her to fully return to the world of competitive precision shooting. I'd be willing to provide consultation on an as-needed basis, Elena agreed, but I want to continue my regular supply duties as my primary responsibility. Chen nodded with understanding that suggested familiarity with soldiers who had complex relationships with their specialized skills. We appreciate any support you can provide, Sergeant. Your demonstration today has given us new perspectives on long-range shooting techniques. As the immediate situation resolved and the range returned to normal training operations, Elena walked back to her supply depot with mixed emotions. The successful shot had reminded her of capabilities she had deliberately suppressed, while also demonstrating that 6 years away from competitive shooting hadn't eliminated the skills that had once made her nationally renowned. The 47 national records she had mentioned represented years of dedication to precision shooting that had consumed her life before military service. Each record had required countless hours of practice, travel to competitions across the country, and a single-minded focus on marksmanship excellence that had ultimately become unsustainable for personal reasons she rarely discussed. Her transfer to supply operations had been motivated by a desire for routine, predictability, and distance from the pressure that accompanied elite-level competition. The work was fulfilling in ways that competitive shooting had never been, providing the satisfaction of supporting other soldiers' missions, rather than pursuing individual achievement. But the events of the morning had demonstrated that suppressed skills don't disappear. They simply wait for circumstances that require their application. Elena had proven to herself and others that her marksmanship abilities remained intact despite years of deliberate neglect. As she resumed her inventory checklist, Elena reflected on the unexpected turn her day had taken.
The 2,600-meter shot had been technically challenging but not significantly more difficult than competitions she had dominated years earlier. The real challenge had been deciding to step forward when her expertise was needed, despite her preference for maintaining the anonymity that supply operations provided. 3 hours later, as the visiting delegation arrived for their scheduled demonstration, Elena watched from her supply depot as Master Sergeant Chen provided a detailed briefing on the successful long-range engagement. The shot would be discussed in military marksmanship circles for months, contributing to tactical development and training programs across multiple units. But Elena Martinez had already returned to counting ammunition and processing equipment requests, finding satisfaction in work that others might consider mundane. The supply sergeant who had shocked elite snipers continued her logistics duties, with the same meticulous attention to detail that had characterized her competitive shooting career. The only visible change was the rifle case that now sat beside her desk, a Barrett M82 that Colonel Wade had authorized for her use during future consultations. It served as a reminder that specialized skills, once acquired, never truly disappear. They simply wait for the moment when duty calls them back into service. Elena had proven that excellence can remain hidden until circumstances demand its revelation. The 47 national records that nobody knew about had mattered when operational success required capabilities beyond standard training. And sometimes the most important shot isn't fired by the person everyone expects. It's fired by the soldier who has been quietly prepared for the moment when extraordinary skills become necessary. As the sun set over Forward Operating Base Sentinel, Elena completed her final inventory check of the day with the quiet satisfaction of someone who had successfully balanced competing aspects of her identity. She remained the supply sergeant who ensured every soldier had what they needed, but now everyone knew she was also the precision shooter, who could deliver impossible shots when the mission required it. The Barrett M82 sat beside her desk as evidence of skills that had emerged from deliberate concealment when duty demanded their application. And Elena Martinez continued her work with the knowledge that expertise, once gained, becomes a permanent part of who you are, even when you choose to keep it hidden until the moment it's needed most.